I don't get sick of that. Ever. Last time we did a night of worship, it just kept going. People were just like, it was awesome. Perfect. And you asked for more than that. Good morning, Faith Alliance Church.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good to see everybody this morning. Wonderful day. Great time of worship. Great congregation. I love everything about this. I love you guys. I love worshiping with you. Absolutely one of the greatest things I do. It's just spectacular. And I don't get enough of that. If you were here last week, we were talking about Joshua. Last week I said that I'm doing some jumping around in the Bible, and I'll tell you again that whenever that happens, I start to get suspicious. When I'm listening to a pastor preach, and he's taking a piece from here, and a piece from here, and a piece from there, and a piece from here, and he starts building those together to build a point, you need to be very, very careful what point he's making. Okay, that should set off some red flags for you. I am doing that today. I do, before I preach, this goes through my mentors. I pass it to them. And of course, it goes through our pastor as well to make sure that, especially when I'm doing this, that the concepts and the precepts that I'm building on are accurate to the verses that I'm using, so that they're true to the meaning of the verses that I'm putting together, that the point that I'm putting together isn't some heretical weirdness. Do you know what I mean? But don't take my word for it. I challenge you, and I think you should, take the verses home and look at them yourselves. We do the homework here throughout the week. I don't know if you're paying attention, if you follow along at the Faith Alliance family page on Facebook, but every day of the week we have verses that tie back into the sermon from the previous week. And some of those will be the verses that I'm using today as well. So I do challenge you, and I do say, yes, absolutely, you should read through those verses and make sure that I am being as accurate as I am hoping I am. And that, as like I said, with the pastor's approval, we're building to a point that means something. Last week I talked to you about whether or not we are the elect. And does anybody remember from last week? You are the elect. That's right. And then I said, this is the faith. And you guys would say, try it again. This is the faith? This is the faith. I like it. This is the way. So this week we're also going to be talking about Joshua, a different part of, well, pretty much the same part of Joshua, really. Just for a more quick review, just so you know, I struggled with the name for the sermon this week. I did come up with is the Gratuity Included. The idea here is your salvation really free? And should we, is the tip included in that, or do we have to pay? Is there something on top of that we need to? I did, it was almost, now what am I supposed to do? Was what I was going to call it. And then I was going to, well, what am I supposed to do now? And the last one I changed, but what am I supposed to do now? What gets your attention more than a cute kitten with big old eyes? Right? But I landed on, is gratuity included? Last week we also talked about eternal perspective, and I told you that would come into play this week. As a review, I ride a motorcycle. I ride a motorcycle a lot. That's my gigantic orange machine that's out in the parking lot right now. It's kind of hard to miss a 300-pound guy on the 1800 cc's of Honda VTX, bright orange and chrome. You'll see me on the street, wave high. I'll wave back. But I put a lot of miles on, and the idea that I was explaining was the difference between the way I go home and the shortest way home, right? And what we were talking about is, I think it's this one. So this is me at work, and this is where I live in Slickville, and this is the 2 hours and 35 minutes I drove home. But from God's view, right, on a top-down eternal view, looking down on it, he knew where I was going, and he had that path for me. But sometimes my view is a little bit different. My view looks a lot like this. Stuck in traffic, not happy about it, especially when I'm on the bike. It gets really hot when you're on a motorcycle in traffic. So sometimes this is my view, but it was always, this was God's view, if it's going to turn. There it is. See God's view, and then my view. Do you see the difference? Eternal perspective has God's view and my view, God's view. Sometimes my view is this, though. Isn't that great? Hold on a second. Yes, you do get rewarded sometimes in your view, just really, you know what I mean, in life in general, too. In God's plan, there are moments that we have that are just tremendous. Still, what I was talking about, if you remember, was Joshua in the walls of Jericho. The first thing that God says to Joshua in that event is, isn't this awesome? I've given you Jericho. God hasn't revealed to him his plan yet, and he hasn't enacted this ridiculous plan that God is about to give him. Ridiculous in the sense that this is a warrior tribe. They're ready to go to war, and God said, yeah, you're not going to go to war here. You're just going to walk around a lot and stay quiet. So God's view is the eternal perspective. Ours is a little bit different. So last week we covered the eternal perspective and the idea that we are the elect. So the question is, you, nicely done, are the elect. So then now what is sort of what this leads into. Look, I was in church. I grew up in church, right? I was baptized as a baby. I went to church every Sunday. I did the Sunday school thing. I didn't get saved until I was in my 20s. I was in church for a couple of decades before I heard the gospel message. And that's not, unfortunately, uncommon. So there's times, I think, where we assume that I assume that I understand something, and I can't tell you week after week how I go, oh, wait, hold on a second. I didn't have as good a grasp on that as I thought I did. Or, oh my goodness, I've never heard that before. How can I be in church as long as I've been in church and I've never heard that before? Because the people we're talking to are assuming that we've been in church our whole lives and that we know all this stuff already. And sometimes we need to go back and iron out some of the wrinkles. I want to look today at what you owe for being a Christian. There's a collective intake that I feel there as people go, what? That doesn't sound anything like what we've been told. And it may not be, because from the time you were saved, you've been preached at and yelled at the word salvation is free. Salvation is free. Salvation is free. Salvation is free. It wasn't free. It was free to you. But it cost everything. Somebody told you at some point that being saved was Shangri-La. And it's not Shangri-La. It's the promised land. But wait, Bill, what's the difference? I'm so glad you asked. We're going to go to the Old Testament. To the Old Testament we go.
To the map post.
Why is it that we feel like the Old Testament is downstairs in the basement somewhere and that we have to go find it? The Old Testament is alive and relevant to everything that we do every single day. We're going to start, to the Old Testament we go. We're going to start in Joshua chapter 12 in verse 9. Originally I was going to have a gigantic scroll as I'm going to read all the names of the kings that Joshua conquered in the promised land. Turns out finding a scroll is a lot harder than you think. Making one is almost impossible. No scroll. Sorry. Joshua chapter 12. Actually, I think I start at 7. Do I not? And these are the kings of the country which Joshua and the children of Israel smote. I use the Old English, the King James, the original King James. I don't normally do King James. Come on, man, smoke. How did you get to use smoke? It's a great word we lost track of. The Joshua and the children of Israel smote on this side of the Jordan on the west, from Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon, even until the Mount Halak. That goes up to Seir. We're going to stumble our way through this, all of us, trust me. Which Joshua gave unto the tribes of Israel for a possession according to their divisions. In the mountains, and in the valleys, and in the plains, and in the springs, and in the wilderness, and in the south country, the Hittites, the Amorites, and the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The king of Jericho, 1. The king of Ai, which is beside Bethel, 1. The king of Jerusalem, 1. The king of Hebron, 1. The king of Jarmuth, 1. The king of Lachish, 1. We're catching a theme here. The king of Eglon, 1. The king of Gezer, 1. The king of Debir, 1. The king of Geder, 1. The king of Hormah, 1. The king of Arad, 1. The king of Libnah, 1. The king of Adullam, 1. The king of Makkedah. Is that right? How do you spell that? Anybody got Makkedah? I couldn't find that one. Anyway, 1. The king of Bethel, 1. The king of Tapua, 1. The king of Hefer, 1. The king of Aphak, 1. The king of Lasharon, 1. The king of Madon, 1. The king of Hazor. I need a drink. 1. The king of Shemamalamala, 1. The king of Ashraf, 1. The king of Tanakh, 1. The king of Megiddo, 1. Are they making these places up? They're not really. They really aren't. The king of Kedesh, 1. The king of Jokneam of Carmel, not the other Jokneam, 1. The king of Dor and the coast of Dor, not the other king of Dor, 1. The king of nations of Gilgal, 1. The king of Tirzah, 1. All kings, 30 and 1. 30 and 1. That's 31 to you and me when we're not reading the King James Version. We just say 31. A lot of kings. Does fighting 31 kings sound like Shangri-La to you? Does it sound like when I say the Promised Land? Is that the first thing that you think of? It's not the first thing I thought of. Self-portrait, I promise I'll put that in every single sermon. Because I believe that is a perfect picture of me. Just bawling along. On a sidebar, I did want to say, we're talking about Joshua a lot, and I didn't do a whole bunch of character about who Joshua is and where he came from. I talked a little bit about some of his history last week, but I think that everything that needs to be said about Joshua is said in chapter 4, verse 14. That day, the Lord, that's God to you and me, the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all of Israel, and they, Israel, stood in awe of him all the days of his life. Why isn't it doing it? Me and my clicker. That day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him all the days of his life, just as they had stood in awe of Moses. There aren't a lot of people that you could say that you stood in awe of all the days of their life. And the Lord himself exalted Joshua, and they stood in awe of him all the days of his life, just like they did with Moses. I don't know that you need to build any more character studies on Joshua other than the fact that he did everything that God told him to do. And that's a spirit-filled life, including beating 31 kings. I'm a little bit ahead of myself. I told you we're going to jump around some. Right now we're going to go back to Exodus chapter 3, verse 16. Exodus chapter 3, verse 16. I swear. There it is. Go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. They were slaves, if you remember. And I have promised to bring you up and out of your misery in Egypt, into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. We just read about those guys and what happens to them. A land flowing with milk and honey. A land flowing with milk and honey. I'm going to bring you out of this slavery that you're in, and I'm going to lead you into the promised land. A land flowing with milk and honey. A land flowing with milk and honey that we're going to need 40,000 soldiers to conquer. there's a juxtaposition here that we overread or that we read past very quickly. The promised land is going to require 40,000 soldiers, and we're going to have to conquer 31 kings. The promised land is really about living in the Spirit. The story here is what happens when you don't, and God says you're all going to die in the desert, right? And then Joshua is now going to be the one who takes you into the promised land, and they get into the promised land, and you thought it was bad in the desert, but now you see the work begins. Yeah, you wandered in the desert for 40 years, and now we get to go to the land of milk and honey, but now the work begins. Now we need 40,000 soldiers, and we got to go beat 31 kings. Is there any part of that sounds easy? Your salvation wasn't free. The moment of your salvation, when you become the elect, it's not a meal that you ate that somebody's going to pay for. Right? It's not your mechanic fixed your car for you and he's not going to charge you. This isn't work that got done in the past. This is work that's ongoing now. The sins that he died for, a lot of them you haven't committed yet. They're still to come. Yeah, he died in the past, but the grace is ongoing. You can't pay for something that isn't concluded yet. Although your salvation is free to you, it cost everything. It cost the life of Jesus Christ.
Amen. Yes.
Can you put a value on that? Can you even, for a second, try to get your brain around the Son of God, sinless and blameless, being crucified so that your sins? Does that sound free? At all. But the thing is, it is free to you. Do you see the difference? Yes, we've been screamed at our whole lives. Salvation is free. Salvation is free. Salvation is free. It wasn't free. It wasn't free. It's free to you. When I can't get the right picture in my head, I can't get it out of my head sometimes. The fact that he would be beaten, pulled out his beard, spat on, mocked, humiliated. They knew he didn't do anything wrong. The people were crucified next to the guy crucified next to him. Pontius Pilate knew he didn't do anything. They were pull your beard out, bludgeoned with fists, scourged, which is just horrifying to think about. I can't even, in my 20th century brain, I can't think scourged. There's just never a moment where that sounds free. The blood of his son won't be wasted on worthless. You have immeasurable value. So was salvation free? Well, again, it's free to you. What do you owe? The whole thing started, we got all the way back to where I started, right? What do you owe? Let's go to James chapter 2, verse 14. We're going to ride this out on James chapter 2, verse 14 through 26. There's a lot of reading. I'll give you a second to open your Bible. If you brought it, you might want to read along. I am going to have it up here. We're going to cover some ground on this. I'm going to cover some ground really quick because we're going to grab a big bite of food right here. It's a big bite that we're going to ingest real quick. But it's important that we keep this top-down perspective. All right. What good is it, James is saying, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith, and I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. You believe that there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that, and they shudder. You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do, and not by faith alone. In the same way, was not even Rahab, the prostitute who we just read about, considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. Okay. First of all, there's like 40 sermons in that passage. Yeah. Like at least. But let's be clear. Your salvation was paid for, but it wasn't free. It was free to you. Now, we have 31 kings to defeat. We need 40,000 men and women, children. We need an army of 40,000 people to go conquer 31 kings. Are we in the promised land or not? Did we want the promised land? Isn't that what we were looking for? The land flowing with milk and honey? Is there an able body or disabled body or any able body out there that doesn't need to be in the army right now trying to help us defeat the 31 kings? What do you owe for your salvation? Okay, you don't owe anything. It was paid for. It was. But what are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? Shortest sermon I ever wrote. I love you guys. Let's stand and pray.